Everybody, this is Jessica Duell, your host of the Voice of Bold Business Radio. And today is our program number 8 called Rejuvenate to Elevate. And I can't wait to introduce you to Les Dawsey. Before we do that though, I want to just think for just a minute and set the stage here on the behalf of our conversation. And the way that these openings tend to go is that just because I say something doesn't mean it's going to have anything to do with the conversation that follows, which is kind of funny. So we have like a little mini show, and then we have the actual show, and sometimes they correlate to each other and sometimes they don't. And that's the best part about these conversations, is that we can take these conversations anywhere we want to go. And as leaders within our organization, we have to be ready to do that at any moment. The actions that we take, the words that we say, the concept of where we've come from and where we're going and how do we use them or how we don't use them are really these fuzzy areas that not a lot of people like to talk about because they don't directly relate to productivity and they don't directly relate to efficiency. And at the same time, even though there might not be a direct correlation, there is a direct correlation to growth and output, which of course the byproducts of growth and output really are productivity and efficiency. So it's kind of interesting how all of those things fit together. When we don't take the time to figure out what we're doing, when we're clear in our own head, there's no energy for us to give anybody else because we're trying, even if we don't really think we are, we're trying to figure it out for ourselves. And that fact that we have no energy for anybody else, it does trickle out to everybody in our life. The intimacy in our relationships, our patience with stressful or uncomfortable situations, and we really just start to close down. And so today, Les and I, we're talking about business growth. We're talking about what does rejuvenation mean specifically related to business growth? And then, of course, what does growth then mean? So right after this, we'll be back and we'll meet Les.
Welcome to the Voice of Bold Business, the show that provides everything smart leaders need to evaluate situations, build relationships, and create solutions. Jessica Duell candidly talks about the skills necessary to build tenacity and do more with less. And now, here's Jessica.
Okay, Les, so when you and I were getting ready for the show today, we were talking about the amazing places that we choose to work. And you were telling me you're in your garage. What makes your garage so exciting to be a place for you to work in?
First of all, Jess, I've got it kind of set up so that I can open the garage door and get a wonderful view of my backyard, and it's like being out in nature. And there's something that's very cathartic and grounding about working in an environment that's very natural. And so when weather permits, I love to sit in my garage. I have a very comfortable chair that I sit in. I've made myself a real thick pad that I put in my lap to sit my laptop on because, you know, those laptops can get pretty hot. And I'll write thank you notes, and I'll use my computer to write emails and respond back to people who've written in, or I'll do some mind mapping. I also have a little video lab set up too, where I can shoot video and take pictures and so on and so forth with different backgrounds. So it's a sort of diversion from working out of the traditional office, and kind of reconnects me with creation.
Now, do you also have a regular office that you go to?
Not a traditional regular office. I have had those in the past. I found them to be very confining, almost like a really good place to hide out instead of being out active and engaged. And so, I kind of made a decision that I would force myself to just break away from tradition or from the status quo. I spend the balance of my time actually with my clients and new prospects in a cafe that's downtown Norfolk. I live in the greater Virginia Beach, Norfolk, Virginia area. And downtown Norfolk is kind of central to the 7 cities. Mm-hmm. And I like to be central, and that way people don't have to go too far to get to me. And obviously I prefer them to come to me rather than me going to them. And so I have a little cafe, and the owners have been gracious enough to set aside a little place over in the corner with that's very quiet and private, and kind of put my name on it, and so I meet
love that.
almost everybody there, and it works out wonderfully.
I really like meeting people out and about, whether it's at the library, whether it's at a coffee shop, whether it's to meet them and actually take a walk while we have our first couple of conversations, or even working with somebody to be able to get out in nature and meet outside of their or my regular workspace. It opens up a whole other dimension. And I'm not exactly sure how many people are really tuned in to the fact that that's actually what's occurring when people like you and me drag them out of their traditional comfort zone, the space that I love that you said hide out in. Because my office is not a place I hide out in. I actually am in the flow of traffic around things. And it always cracks me up because the difference between my office and my husband's office is my office has windows on the doors. It's close to where people are coming in and out. And Ryan's office is tucked away, and it has a door that you can't see in, and it's filled with bookshelves. I mean, he's got this amazing cocoon where he goes to be creative, because for him, he's got to be very inside to be creative. Yet he also finds himself working in a lot of other places when he's doing things that require a little bit of extra stimulation. And me, it's like I just need stimulation all the time. It doesn't matter if it's a plant. It doesn't matter if it's the wind outside. Walking down Boulder Creek, which is part of our downtown here in Boulder, Colorado, and just seeing what there is to see. And it's amazing how we get inspiration from different places. And, we're talking about, the title of the show is Rejuvenate to Elevate. And I think that the first thing that we need to do is we need to come up with a working meaning of what rejuvenate means for the purpose of this conversation. Because I'm pretty sure there are different definitions of what rejuvenate means to everybody that's listening.
I have been in a position numerous times in my life where life gave me a knockout punch. I've lost close family members, lost my first son to bad reaction anesthesia. I've had some failures along the way. I've been divorced. I've experienced, a lot of what life is capable of doing to you for various reasons. Some were self-inflicted, and a lot of them were not self-inflicted. And each of those has the potential to really take you out of the game and wear you out, wear you down, kind of grind you to a pulp. And when you get in a place like that, it's almost impossible to be very productive and useful, not only to yourself and to your family, but also to the marketplace. And so what I discovered was that it's possible, though, to get completely rejuvenated, almost as if those things never happened to you. Now, in the beginning stages, I'll have to admit, I struggled with understanding how to untangle all of that and break free from it, because of all of the conditioning, all the programming that happened from the people who influenced me, the books that I read, the stuff I learned in school about how you're supposed to naturally respond to the things that happen. Like maybe one of the most common is when you lose a child, you're supposed to stay in grief forever and that the wound never heals. And I challenged that. I went to the canvas, so to speak, and I dug deep and I said, is that really true? I mean, do I have to continue to suffer the rest of my life or for an extended period because I've lost my child? And what I came to the conclusion was, even though it was difficult for me to make the decision, that the reality is no, that I can move forward free from that pain and talk about it without any sorrow in my voice or in my heart when I think about them. I was able to do so and take with me all of the best things that I experienced his short 5 years being in my life. And so I can have this conversation with you, Jess, or with anyone without breaking down or becoming very sorrowful or filled with grief. And I keep his picture prominently displayed in my office because every time I see it, well, actually not in my office anymore, but in my bedroom, because every time I see it, it reminds me of those very special moments that we had together. And so the same thing applies to business. What we end up doing, it seems, is we end up beginning to look at the challenges and the opportunities that surface in our lives and in our business through the lens of our past. And much of the lens of our past is false, or much of the history that we have experienced isn't true. So we reason by analogy, we reason by conventional wisdom, by the status quo, or by tradition. And a lot of that just isn't reality. And so I discovered that I get to decide what reality is. I get to choose. So if something isn't defined in a way that gives me the kind of results I want to experience, then I'm doing what I can do to redefine it so that the results line up with my desire. Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense. The image that is coming into my head is the phoenix, where from the ashes comes something even more beautiful. And it has to come from some sort of pain and suffering and acceptance that that did occur, yet it does not bind. And I'm not sure about the mythology of the phoenix and how many times you can actually, maybe should we call it we could make it a thing for our show, the phoenix. How many times can we phoenix and still exist? And what I hear you saying is it's forever, it's infinite. And that's very similar to what my definition of rejuvenation is. I mean, there's an element of self-care, and there's a whole industry that has made itself literally because there are billions of dollars that we spend on ways to rejuvenate. And for me, while those are fun and useful and relaxing, they allow us to continue to avoid what we need to face. And so for me, rejuvenation is very similar in the sense that acceptance of what we are now, recognizing where we came from, is the platform for where we're going. We can choose to drag everything with us and remember the negative things, or we can say, yeah, that happened to us. And then everything kind of compacts itself. It all like fits in the size of a pebble that you can put in your pocket and say, yeah, I was that person. Yeah. And that really made me who I am right now. And recognizing who I am right now is what, to me, rejuvenation really is all about. It's because I have everything that is not holding me back that made me who I was and am.
I've had about 10 major rejuvenations in my life because I lost my son, I lost both of my siblings way too early, lost my grandfather too early, my grandmother too early. I've been bankrupt in business early on, been divorced, and I've suffered physically a real setback because of injury as a result of bull riding that really took me out of commission for the better part of the year and really kind of lingered in a chronic kind of way for the better part of 10 years. Mm-hmm. But I maintain the belief that at some point, at some time in the future, I would eventually be free from that chronic pain and injury. And I just maintained that belief and eventually broke free. But Jess, the way that I came to my conclusions was by looking at nature. Mm-hmm. Nature is a perfect example of rejuvenation. Every year, we have this springing of life that happens right in the spring season, mm-hmm. and then the maturing of life through the summer seasons, and then fall happens, and everything that has been useful for those seasons and is no longer useful is now shed. And it goes down into the ground where it decomposes and turns into something useful again. It nourishes the roots of the trees and the plants and the grass and becomes food for the insect life. And then in the spring, because of those nutrients, it pops back out again and it's fully rejuvenated. And so it's possible for us to live that same exact way if we're willing to accept that what we've learned in our past isn't necessarily true. One of my favorite, Jess, is I spent a lot of time with my grandfather and grandmother growing up. They were a huge influence on my life. And of course, they came through the Great Depression, and their thinking was based on sort of an industrial mindset, an industrial type education. And so their advice to me in some cases about my future was to get a good education so that you can land a nice, safe, secure job with one of the big type manufacturing firms, maybe GE or one of the automaker plants, so that when you retire at age 65, you'll have some money set aside. So if you get sick or whatever, that you'll be able to take care of all that. And I thought to myself, as I matured and as I continued to educate myself, I thought, wow, that's a really outdated, irrelevant way to view and think about your future. Nowhere is it written that we have to finish at age 65. that was a program conceived in the minds of industrialists because they knew that the factory floor would be more productive if younger people were working those machines. But we don't live in that society anymore. We don't live in that culture anymore. A lot of what we do in our day-to-day job is not dependent upon our physicality. It's dependent upon our cognition, our cognitive ability, and the intellectual property that we've developed. And so why would I want to stop contributing just because I reach a certain age? Why would I want my future to get dimmer the older I get? Why can't it continue to get bigger and better, and I can do something even more incredible in my future than anything I've done in my past?
And I would say people of a certain age, I do not know if you're part of this group or not, Les, because I wouldn't put you in this group, but you're right. At a traditional, there was going to be a period of time where you worked and worked and worked, and then you had a few years of rest before you transitioned out of this life. And people who did that. Well, now with our average age increasing, with the amount of information that we have about how can we lengthen our own lives, and being in a society where medicine can keep us alive longer, we really have to challenge. And I would say that there are, I don't know which part of the baby boomers, because the baby boomer generation is so huge in terms of the number of years that it spans, but there are definitely a part of the baby boomer generation that really are facing exactly what you're describing, in the sense that, well, I don't have to do it, and this world doesn't even really support that anymore. And so what do? And we're in a place where, as a group, the first time as a group, people are like maybe phoenixing all at the same time. From my worldview, being of a different generation, Les, what I noticed about what you were saying, we have a lot of commonalities in thinking, which I very much like. And part of them is about nature and the fact that there's a cycle. My thing about that is, when you have spring, and then you have summer, and then you have fall, and then you have winter, and each of those things are doing necessary jobs for our earth to continue to support us. Maybe in life they're not cyclical like that. Maybe in life one does not necessarily precede or follow another. Maybe they can happen out of order. And that's where I look at life and go, okay, I'm at the stage where, when I was in college, what was the purpose of college? The concept, it was the beginning of, what is college actually going to get us? And the people that are my age, when they finished college, when we first went at 18, so, they were 22 or 24, depending on the degrees that they got, and they're looking for those traditional type jobs where they'll be able to do something for a really long time. And then things happened with the disruption of technology, the way that practices that become more transparent, that globalization occurs, for lack of a pretty descriptive term, where there are layoffs at every level, and people who have been in the workforce for 20 years are competing for the same jobs that people are right out of college. And so that's changed a lot, and people that are my age, in their mid-30s, are also finding this place of phoenixing of, well, the path that my parents told me and the path that worked for my grandparents isn't going to work for me. And now what? And I loved when you said cognition, because when we think about cognition and the way that we work, one of my big points is problem solving. There is so much that we can do just with the simple act and the steps of learning how to problem solve, and we can all do it. And we all do it every day. That's the thing. We problem solve every day, yet at some point there's like this limiting belief that we can't problem solve anymore, that we can't, that there's just this stuff that we can't do. And that mindset is really limiting. And I think what I hear you saying is that rejuvenation is a challenge to a fixed mindset, if you will, where everything is closed and we know what we can do. Because and you're going to be able to tell me this, the quote, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. I don't remember who said that. I will make sure that goes in the minutes.
That's been cited to Henry Ford, and Jim Rohn was a big user of that quote. Jim Rohn being a father of personal development. Your experience tells you that that's true. There's a couple points I think I want to make. Number one, I heard this from Dan Sullivan. He uses these words or uses these terms about lightening up your past so that your future becomes free.
Yes.
When you look back at your past, there's really only four things that have any real value or use for you in the future or in the present.
Mm-hmm.
The relationships that are highly leveraged, meaning that they nourish you, that they nurture you, that they influence you in a positive way, and that they challenge your assumptions. Those kinds of relationships are very valuable, and they deserve to move forward with you into your future. If you have relationships that don't, then it needs to be decided what status those relationships have moving forward. Do you move them out to the outer circle so that they don't have any direct influence on you? Because the people who are closest to you influence you positively or negatively. Mm-hmm. If you really want something better in your future than you've had in your past, then you've got to sift through and sort and cull, if that's the word you want to use, the relationships that aren't highly leveraged.
By the way, that can include your family. I'm going to just toss that in there. We're going to just get right down to it. It could be your work, where you're at, and the people you're working with, but it could also be your family. I remember I was having a conversation with one of my chiropractors, because the type of chiropractic care I'm in is like this whole phase, and they have the seasons like you were talking about, and there's 12 stages of breathing, and there's this triad of change and how we do the world. And one of the things she said to me when we were working through some breathing exercises at the end, she was asking me questions, and the outcome was, Jessica, I just think you broke up with your family and you're just friends now. And I thought about it, and I went, wow, because I love my family and I know they gave me so much, but there's also so much strife, and I took it on all myself. All my issues with my family originated with me. And through an exercise, over time, I was able to let go of what my assumptions were, let go of what my experiences were, and just let it be for what it is. And in fact, since I became friends with my family, I have stronger relationships with both my sisters and my mom and my dad. It's the concept of maybe letting them go, and if they come back, they're the right ones. That whole idea as well. But the facing the fear that they may not be right is a big deal. Okay, and you were going on to number 2.
To wrap up the sort of relationship thing, it's possible to rejuvenate your thinking concerning a relationship you have that's not highly leveraged. And by highly leveraged, again, I mean nurturing, supportive, encouraging, challenging, by changing the way in which you see or view someone. And I don't mean to view them or change the way you see them to a negative way. I just mean looking at them and saying, I do not want to allow them to influence me, and making a decision that you won't allow that to happen moving forward. Mm-hmm. That makes sense?
It does. It makes complete sense.
Yeah, so it's being very intentional, very consciously intentional about who you will and who you won't allow to influence you. So the second thing is all of the wins that you've experienced, all of the successes that you've had. And for most people, they can look back into their history pretty far back and remember all of those wonderful moments where the successes or the wins were very, very powerful, very fulfilling and satisfying and deeply rewarding. Those deserve to move forward with you into your future. Then are the lessons. And so the reason I didn't mention losses or failures is because I don't believe in losses or failures. I believe that there's only wins and lessons. So the lessons are all of those highly leveraged lessons. And here's what I mean by that. So my first business was immediately successful. I think I was 19 or 20 years old. And within a couple of years, I had 21 employees, and I was doing a couple $1 million a year in business. And that was back in the 80s. So I had a lot of success very early. And I went out and I brought a partner in, and it ended up being a very toxic, very scary partnership for me, because this guy had zero conscience. I was really kind of scared that maybe he was a sociopath.
Okay.
So I ended up liquidating my shares in the business, and I moved on very, very quickly. But here's what I carried with me. There was a lesson, right? Mm-hmm. But the lesson that I took was partnering is not a good idea. Mm. And that's not true. Partnering is a great idea if it's done right. Yep. So that's not a leveraged lesson. Partnering isn't a good idea. A more appropriate lesson is, let me take responsibility for what I didn't do to set this up properly. Let me learn what I need to learn in order to do it properly in the future. That's a leveraged lesson.
And
So,
sometimes it takes
no,
more than once. I have 2 failed partnerships
yeah,
under my belt, and each one of them taught me something different. And so you're right. The lesson I took, and it's interesting you don't believe in failure, because I do believe in failure, and I believe it's what you do with it. You can either be a failure or have failure and hold it over you with pain and suffering, or you can be a failure and talk about being leveraged just as you are and saying, wow, that really sucked, and I hit a bottom in a place I didn't even know. But guess what? I didn't stay there. So what can I take
yeah,
away and how can I use that? So that's very interesting. I like our different definitions that way because they both get to the same end goal, which is, you're right, leverage the lesson in an open, approachable way so that they can be called upon to make a different decision in the future versus going, oh, well, I can never do that again. Just like what you were saying.
the psychology is so important, right? So how we look at what happens really determines the impact it has on us in the present
Mm-hmm.
and what it looks like for us in the future. And so rather than calling it a failure or calling it a loss, if you call it a lesson, then it opens you up to really extract the wisdom that was available in that situation so that in the future you make better decisions, better choices, so that you get better results. What
Mm-hmm.
often happens is we view it as a failure, we beat ourselves up, and then through that lens, we make decisions in the present that end up creating a future that looks very much like
The
our
past.
past.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Truth. Well, okay, and the fourth one.
Yeah, and the fourth one is, what did I say? All of your capabilities, the unique genius that you have developed. I believe we come into the earth with some very unique talents that
Mm-hmm.
make us who we are, and it's our job to turn those into capabilities through effort, through education, through interactions, through finding our unique place in the world and really putting those out there for everyone to see. And so those 4 things and those 4 things alone are really the only thing from your past that deserve to move forward with you into your future, because they're the only things that are really useful. Everything else needs to stay buried in virtual dust in your past, never to be looked at again.
Let it become the fertilizer for the next seed to grow.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you nailed it.
Exactly. Okay, so you said usefulness before, and in describing yourself, you want to continue to be useful. And you were just talking about capabilities, the natural gifts that we bring to the world, and how we use them to develop more of the same skill as well as additional skills for usefulness. And so thinking about that, I'm a big believer that when people feel useful, they feel motivated. It's the biggest motivator cannot be outside of us. We really are our own biggest motivator, and it comes from our feeling of satisfaction, that we're doing a job that we know that matters, that we're valued for the job that we are doing. And when you take those 3 things and to define usefulness, it's amazing how big of a gap exists in our companies today. It's like, here's another way that our whole world is phoenixing, in the sense that technology is really a big disruption, and other innovations are a really big disruption, and people are able to upset the status quo because of our access and our ability to think and come up with these ideas. And the ways of doing things, I know my dad is going to get a pension. His pension is much smaller than it would have been if he was in a different industry. My father-in-law is also going to get a pension. My father-in-law was a highway state patrolman, and my dad works in manufacturing. He's in management in manufacturing. And so they are going to get pensions because that's what those things did. But the people they're bringing on in management now that are my generation and even younger, they're not going to have pensions. They've totally done away with that. So these people are trying to do business and continue to feel like they're valued, when there's a whole lot less value coming down the pipe based off of the written and unwritten agreements of how the work gets done. So the work is getting done the same, but the way the quote unquote compensation which could be part responsibility, it could be part retirement benefits, it could be part salary, whatever those are, there's a gap there. And I'm not talking about my dad or my father-in-law in this scenario. I'm just, pensions came to mind. And I happen to know two people that are getting pensions. So there's that piece of it. But, their usefulness as benefits start to dwindle in other manufacturing industries, in other parts, and even government. The government is changing the way they're doing pensions and things like that for the people that work at the post office, for teachers, for all of that stuff. We have to actually scramble as people to figure out how we're going to work in our future, because that particular part of it is not taken care of for us anymore. That means our capabilities can't all go into contributing fully to a company. We have to have our attention split. We have to have our capabilities and our usefulness not only taking care of the day-to-day, not only feeling like we belong and we're accepted in our family and in our work, but we also have to be thinking down the road, because nobody's doing that for us anymore. Now, and that's not right or wrong, it just is. And the picture is going to change in another 10 years so much that it's going to make our gifts that we turn into capabilities our competitive advantage or not. Our ability to not only feel useful and be useful, but to be valued, whether that's monetarily, emotionally, or mentally, whatever that driver is, to feel valued. We're going to rely more on our capabilities than we ever have before.
Over the years, as a coach, there's something that's become very, very clear to me, and that is being useful to others is the key to happiness. And when we're focused on being useful to others, in other words, when we're focused on contributing from our unique genius to others, that's where we get our deepest satisfaction. That's where we're most fulfilled. It's when we lose sight of that life becomes a grind, and it takes on a whole new feel, and it just becomes very, very difficult to move through the days or move through the weeks. It's when you clean your thinking up and realize and accept that the reason you're here is to connect with other human beings and to contribute the value that's been placed on the inside of you, that you really become rejuvenated in a sense, and that hole that a lot of people feel is filled. Filling that hole is a fantastic way to get rejuvenated.
When we have a lack of energy, we're basically lacking in a lot of different ways. You're spot on, talking about the quality of the relationships around us. And, sometimes
Right.
we get to choose where we work and sometimes we don't. When we're the top, right, the person who is deciding, do we work with somebody or do we not? Do we have a team or not? If it's not the person who started the company, there's somebody else who is, how do I filter and find the people that fit this culture? People don't get to necessarily choose who they work with. And so what I hear coming through loud and clear from the beginning of the conversation to now is the ability to cultivate relationship is a life necessity that creates the opportunity for amazing growth, whether that's personally, professionally, how much we make, how much the company can make, because all of those things are really intertwined.
I think that we need an awakening in our country and maybe around the world, that education doesn't stop when we finish school, and that it's an ongoing thing, and that we have to be very consciously intentional about keeping our thinking clean, because it's very easy for our thinking to get messy. And when it gets messy, we make choices and we act in ways that do not produce the results that we want in our lives and in the lives of those around us. And once it becomes messy and we start making less than great decisions and we start behaving in less than great ways, it becomes, for lack of a better word, very easy to get trapped in the weeds and to not be able to figure out how to escape. Or, as my friend Stan Bush says, to get wrapped around the axle and can't figure out how to get untangled.
Yeah.
And I see it, Jeff, I see it from the highest levels, working with very wealthy entrepreneurs, down to the, just getting started entrepreneurs or professionals. Very easy for a human being to get wrapped around the axle and lose perspective. And the only way they can get untangled is to get rejuvenated. And a lot of times that requires someone from the outside to help them see what they can't see, help them think about their problem. There's another wonderful phrase that was coined back in the 5th century by a poet named Archilochus. He said, "We don't rise to the level of our expectations. We fall to the level of our training." And I love that quote, but I took it and I modified it a little bit because I think it's more relevant to our time. And that is that we don't rise to the level of our dreams and desires. We stall at the level of our mindsets and our habits.
Mm-hmm.
And so getting rejuvenated and cleaning up your thinking is all about making sure that your mindsets are the ones that are going to get you the kind of results. It's like optimizing your software. If you consider the brain or your thinking to be your software center, your body and your nervous system to be your hardware, then it's like updating your software so that you get maximum performance out of it.
And I'm going to mention problem solving here because one of the quickest, easiest ways to be useful is to be able to help somebody figure out a problem they can't do it on their own. I have a 5-year-old, Carter, and this is something I'm trying really hard to instill in him. How do you problem solve? And so this morning, I asked him to pick up all the hangers off of the floor in his room because he loves to get dressed and he likes to wear shirts with collars. And so he found a shirt with a collar in the closet, and he found a pair of pants that was in the closet, and he took them off the hangers, and he left the hangers on the floor. One of the hangers got stuck underneath his closet door. And so here I am. I walk into his room and I was like, "Oh, you forgot the hangers. Then you're good to go. Everything else looks great. Celebrate all the successes for the things that he did do. Get those hangers done and we're done." And he got really mad. He got mad because he's like, "I can't get this hanger out from underneath the door." It was a pant hanger and it had the 2 little clips on it. And somehow one clip was on each side of the door. So he's looking at that and he's really frustrated and he's looking at me and I'm like, "I think you can figure it out. In fact, I believe you can." And so he thought about it and he remembered something. So instead, he was trying to pull it from left to right and there was a hook getting caught on each side. He could have pulled it straight out from underneath the thing and had no problem, right? I almost opened my mouth and just pull it out a different direction. I let him stick with it. And what he ended up coming up with was he took the clips off. Then he pulled it out from underneath the door, and then he put the clips back on. And he was so proud of that fact. And so it's really great because the story is just the sense of now he's got a baseline. I don't have a frustration yet today, but if I'm looking for something or I need an idea, sometimes he'll be like, "Mom, I believe in you. I know you can do it." And other times he'll sit down with me and he'll think about it and he goes, "Would you like an idea? I think I have an idea for you." And so he is filling that need of not only being able to be self-capable and use his own brain to get stuff done and not rely on his parents for everything, but he's also developing I can model this back. I'm actually useful enough to come up with an idea that might be able to help my mom. Those are the types of things that if we didn't learn them at 5, we can still learn as an adult because problem solving is 4 steps. Look around, decide what the problem is, figure out what data you need. Oh, in the case of the hanger was, well, there's this thing in the way of me getting done what I need to get done. This clip is in the way. Think about the potential options, and I don't know how many he actually thought of, but he picked one and he saw it through to the end. And he didn't have to try again. And sometimes we have to try again and we have to repeat the steps to iterate and to clarify a little bit more to get better and be able to be reliant on ourselves. And if we can problem solve, we can actually model that for other people. And that's usefulness right in of itself. And,
that's a fantastic story, Jess.
Thank you. I actually should probably just do a little video every single day of the thing of the day.
Every parent should be taught that their kid is not the experiment, that life is the experiment, and the kid is the scientist. And if we treated our kids like that, get them to experiment with all the various things that they encounter in life and not treat it as failures, but treat it as lessons, the kids would be so much more happy and so much more useful and productive. And you see what I'm saying? It's like,
I do.
Yeah. So that's a great story.
Thank you. And
hey, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So there's another aspect to this whole getting rejuvenated, and that getting rejuvenated then leads to business growth, it leads to personal growth, it leads to relational growth. And that other variable or that other facet of getting rejuvenated is freedom. So,
Okay.
so when you think about freedom, how do you define it? What do you think it means? Or I should say, what does it mean to you personally?
I think I have two answers. And actually, well, I might have three because I have a couple of different facets. For me, there is a financial stability piece that allows me to feel free. So if I am reaching those goals and I understand what's going on and I know what I want to do and I can go get it, right? There's that whole problem solving thing again. That
Yeah.
and especially when it comes to money, I mean, I have some pretty big hangups about money, and it doesn't matter how much I have, I'm still insecure about it. So working through that, I realized that's really not how I define freedom, even though that's what I thought I defined freedom as. And I was like, well, I guess that's important. I guess it's important to do that. So for me, it's the freedom of choice. And by the freedom of choice, I mean that even when I think I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place, or I have two bad choices that are the only way out, I at least still have the choice. And I can decide what I do for me and Ryan, for me and Ryan and my family, then for me as a business owner, for me and the Red Direction team. I always have a choice. And that is, to me, what freedom means.
Perfect. So let me give you my definition, and
Yeah.
I bet you we're going to find out they're very similar. So
Okay.
I believe that freedom, real freedom, gives us deep access to our own resourcefulness. And that when we're feeling less than free, we have limited access to our resourcefulness. So when I interact with entrepreneurs, and I've been coaching now for almost 15 years, over the 15 years, one of the things I've come to understand, and I have a visual board, is that it looks like most people go through life with their hands up and their fists clenched. So it looks like they're ready to fight all the time.
Ooh, yeah, okay, got it. So in front of me, right?
Yeah, so that's the visual, right?
Uh-huh.
So you're driving through heavy traffic, and if you look at the people around you, you can see it in their face. You can see it in their gestures. They look like they're angry. They're fighting because now they're stuck in traffic, and it's preventing them from getting where they're supposed to go. Right? You see the visual?
Yes.
Or you see someone who is aggravated because it's so hot outside, and they feel angst towards the weather. Or someone who is feeling angst because it's raining, or it's very windy, or it's cold. And so every place a person is feeling angst towards someone or something is a place where they've lost their freedom. And so the key to getting your freedom back is to do what? It's to open up and allow everyone and everything to have the freedom they need to be, so you can be free. Because we get what we give. And so instead of being mad at traffic, or being mad at the idiot who pulled over in front of you, or being mad at the fact that you're now running behind, in the moment, you have the freedom and the power to choose to just allow those things to be what they are, so that you don't lose your freedom. Your freedom actually expands. It actually grows, because you've made a choice to allow the situations and the people around you to have the freedom they need. They really do need it too, by the way, to be effective and to be productive, and to tap deeply into their own resourcefulness, thereby giving yourself the freedom to do the same. So going through life, instead of fighting, it looks like, you're at ease with the world. There's a great story. I want to tell this story. Can I tell it?
Please. Yes.
All right. So this story maybe is my most favorite story of all time. There's a group of college kids walking beside a very raging river. And we'll just say it's the Colorado, right? And it's flood season, and the snow caps are melting, and it's just class 5 rapids. And they're walking alongside the river, and they come to a sharp decline, and they notice that the trail goes down beside the waterfall. And so they take the trail down to the bottom, and at the base, there's this huge pool of torrential water, right? It looks treacherous. and they're standing there checking it out, and suddenly they see an old man pop up in the water right out in the middle. And they think he's dead because he goes back under, and then a few seconds later he pops back up, and then he's bobbing around in the water, and then in a few more seconds he goes back down, and he disappears for, I don't know, 5 or 6 seconds, and then he pops back up, and this just keeps happening. And finally, one of the college kids says, "Oh, we got to find a way to get him out of there." And so they scurry around in the woods, and they're looking for a vine or a stick or something. And while they're doing that, the old man pops up, swims over to the shore, gets out, and starts wiping himself off. And one of the college kids looks and sees him out of the corner of his eye. And he gets the rest of his friends. He says, "Hey, look." And they walk over and they approach the old man, and they say, "Sir, we thought you were dead. We were looking for a way to retrieve your body." And they said, "How did you escape that torrent of water?" And the old man said, "Son, it's very, very easy." He said, "When the water goes down, you go down. And when the water comes up, you come up. The key is not to fight it."
Nice. Okay. That's not how I thought the story was going to end. So I'm like, oh, that is so good. Okay. So don't fight it. And I love that. One of the things I had to learn, it was a very hard lesson, and it was recurring for many years, was that there's a difference between going with the flow and there's then being a leaf in the wind. And so when you're going with the flow, you could be totally rooted, you're completely present, you know exactly what's going on, even if it's scary. Yet when you're a leaf in the wind, you really have no control over where you're going or what's going on around you. And so from your story, that was, it goes back to the lessons and the capabilities of what I hear you talking about when we were talking about rejuvenation directly.
Yeah.
As it relates to our potential growth is we can't control everything. And as soon as we can recognize that, we're in a place of expansion instead of contraction.
Yeah. There's so many things in life and in business that can bind you or hem you in. And if you don't take deliberate action to free yourself from them, it'll just get more restrictive and more restrictive and more restrictive. And eventually you just get to where you can't even move. Mm-hmm. And when that happens, life just sucks, to be frank. Business sucks.
Yeah. So
the key is really just to get yourself in a position where you're challenging your assumptions. It's almost like, Jess, it's almost like getting a beginner's mind.
Yeah.
You remember when you first became an entrepreneur?
Yes.
Remember how much enthusiasm and drive and passion you had in those early stages? And your mind wasn't filled with a lot of stuff that was possible or impossible. It was just this blank canvas. Mm-hmm. Do you remember how productive you were back then?
Yes, I can even tell you how productive I have been as recently as deciding to do the Voice of Bold Business Radio. And because the energy just comes and you just work as long as there's energy. And when there's not, it's like, oh, I guess it's time to, it's time to eat, or I need to go take a walk, or something like that. But even during those times, it's not like a crash and burn. It's just a little bit of a lull in that awesome innate wisdom that's around this access to this resourcefulness.
Uh-huh. Exactly. So getting rejuvenated is like going back to how it was when you first decided you were going to become an entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. It's getting a brand new start, only with more wisdom, with some leveraged relationships, with some highly developed capabilities, and some tangible, make you feel really good all the way to your core wins that you can use now to move into an even better future than anything you've done in your past.
Exactly. And for everybody listening, by the way, that may directly relate to you. It also may include landing a new job, getting the promotion that you wanted, bringing in the client you've been working on for a while, finishing a project within the company that everybody has been anxiously waiting for to be completed. I mean, all of those I'm sure they have their lessons, but they're all wins that have this level of energy that comes with them that Les is talking about.
Right on. Yeah. Right on, Jess.
And what I love I keep saying that a lot. I'm enjoying myself so much. We've spent a lot of time talking about rejuvenation, and we just touched on the growth piece, but it's almost like without one, or it's not that we couldn't have the other, but without rejuvenation, our growth is actually limited. Is that a correct thing to take away from the conversation?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I completely agree. You must enter into a stage where rejuvenation takes place in order for you to break sort of out of the old and into something new.
Uh-huh.
And getting rejuvenated, I guess I'm saying more than anything that the key to real rejuvenation is to clean up your thinking, right? Set aside all of the assumptions that aren't true, all of the dogma that may have, taken a bite out of you and still got its teeth sunk in you. Separate yourself from anything that you can't validate as being true, so that you enter into this next phase of your life or into your future free from all of that. That's the key to creating incredible growth.
So everybody, you're hearing it right here. You can be a Sphinx as many times as you want. Just as beautiful, just as talented, just as resourceful as you could possibly ever be. And one takeaway here from my perspective really is that we have to constantly challenge ourselves. So as a leader, there are a lot of leadership qualities, and we can have leadership skills at whatever job we're doing, however we're going through life. Somebody has to stand at the front of the line. And there might be 3 or 4 lines that are all, 3 or 4 departments that have these cross-functional teams and all of these things. Somebody's got to lead that cross-functional team. Somebody's got to lead the department. Somebody's ultimately responsible for figuring out how the things are going to get done to achieve the company goals. And rejuvenation it's the heart of it. I'm going to go back to the angst piece. Where we feel angst, let me see if I can find it in my notes. Where we feel angst are the places that we're lacking freedom. And that is a great place to start. So an action item to take away is, when you're thinking about freedom, what does it mean to you? And do you have any weird feelings about it? Or maybe you just want to take a look at your whole life and go, these are the areas that I feel good about, and these are the areas that I'm unsure about, or I have fear around, or I avoid. And those areas, that's what Les is talking about when he's talking about we've got to set ourselves free so that we can move into our future. Because if we don't, we're not going to be able to grow. And if we don't, we could end up with this mindset of, well, I can't do that. And remember, just because you think you can't, you're right. So challenging those assumptions to be able to go, okay, what can I do more of? Okay, does this really work for me, or do I need to find something that's going to work better for me? Or, wow, this really doesn't work, and I've got to do something about it. And that's when I would say you're cleaning up your thinking according to what Les has been sharing with us so far. Les, any last words before we wrap up this program?
Yeah, I would say there's a lot of talk out there about change being really hard. And there are times when change is harder than other times. But I would say to you that change doesn't have to be hard if you'll set aside your emotion and just be very literal about your decisions. So, for instance, if sitting in traffic is a trigger for you and it makes you lose your cool and your blood pressure spikes, set aside your emotion, look at it and go, how can I redefine this so that it no longer impacts me in a negative way? And then literally, figuratively, consciously redefine it in the way that best suits you so that in the future it no longer pushes your button and makes you lose your freedom. The reason I mention that is because I had that exact experience. I rolled up on traffic jets. I'm the type A, 80 miles an hour, balls to the wall, get out of my way because I wanted to be in the lead type driver.
Me
and
too.
I rolled up on traffic one day and I lost my cool, like I had done many times before. And in that moment, I caught myself and I went, wait a minute, I don't want to live my future this way. How can I redefine this? And I literally sat there and I thought about it and I redefined it. And I got to tell you, I haven't sat in traffic since. Not because I don't get out and drive, but because I just don't see it anymore. It doesn't impact me in a negative way.
Awesome.
So be very literal.
Okay,
Set
I
your
think
emotion
that's
aside.
good.
Be very literal.
You know, I'm going to tell you my little story about this too, because I had a little different experience with it when I was commuting through traffic, and something that would take 45 minutes with no traffic and an hour and 10 minutes with traffic. That extra, whatever the difference is, I'm horrible at math, doesn't matter. That really got to me. I was like, I am so unproductive. And it didn't matter if I was listening to music and singing my heart out. It didn't matter if I was listening to audiobooks. It didn't matter if I was talking to my friends and my family on the phone. I hated it. And then I'm telling my dad, and I'm complaining to my dad. This was probably 7 years ago, so not that long ago. I was a full-grown adult, and I like to drive fast like you do, Les. I like to drive fast like you. I was complaining to my dad about it, and he goes, well, what can you really do about it? I was like, that's so wise, and I hate you for that right now. And I love you because you just opened my eyes to this. So I thought about it, and the next day, I used to make a game. I turned a game out of it. How many times, because you can feel, when what you were talking about, Les, you can actually feel that energy seeping out of every car around you on the road. And so the fact you don't see it anymore is awesome. The next time I'm in traffic, I'm going to have to try it a little differently. Up until just this moment, what I've done is I turned it into a game. I was like, yesterday I had to hit my brakes, 15 times between the time that I had to slow down for traffic to the time I could speed up from traffic again. So it's 2 spots on the highway. And today I'm going to try and do it in 10. And so I had to consciously be aware of everybody else and the movement on the road and because by the way, when you stop and slow down enough, you can tell who's going to cut you off because they're having the super bad day, the super bad morning, the super bad afternoon. I actually was able to spend 35 minutes in traffic every day and get down to the point I only had to hit my brakes 5 times. And sometimes more, but because all of traffic was stopped, not because we were just all crawling along together trying to figure out how to get to work during rush hour. And so I was a little curious, and I made it fun. I turned it into a game. And to this day, I think about, and now your story, it's like, how can you shift it? What curiosity can you bring to it that would really suit your personality to be able to make it different? And I have to tell you, that difference, Les, if you don't see it, after I tell you what I'm going to say, I want to hear for you. Those turned out to be better than the shower for ideas for me. Was driving to and from wherever I was going in this traffic. I had amazing breakthroughs. I was emailing, I was using Siri. I don't know if we had Siri. I actually, at one point, had a pad and a pen that I had attached to my steering wheel because I was frantically writing notes as I'm going slow through traffic because the stuff just wouldn't stop coming to me. And then I eventually had Siri and would send myself emails. Nonetheless, though, it was a great place to get creative and have ideas. I solved more problems there than I did anywhere else. Things like that. How about you? When you don't see the traffic, what's that like?
Oh, well, there's so many wonderful benefits to not seeing the traffic anymore. That's one of them. Yeah, it becomes an incubation place for new ideas and insights. It's a great environment to sort of get yourself centered. Here's the thing that I noticed that was the most beneficial, though. I would be going somewhere to meet someone and get hung up in traffic and lose myself, lose my freedom, and then show up at the appointment with the person I was going to meet, not there because I'm still hung up in traffic. All of my energy is where it's in the past. And now I can't be present in the future with this person that I'm meeting with. And do you think they felt it? Of course.
Of course.
And so it's impossible to lose yourself or lose control like I was doing and then show up and meet with somebody and not project that onto the person you're meeting with. And so the biggest benefit to me was that I could now show up and be ready and present so that I could tune into this other human being I was meeting with and really get from that interaction what I'm supposed to get from it and give to that other person what they were supposed to get from me. And it just literally changed everything.
I love that. Yes. Present, readiness, all comes from the willingness to rejuvenate and take the time and the space to figure out if you're expanding or contracting, so you can actually consciously choose the steps toward expansion, which is growth in whatever area you want, for whatever capacity that you have to find the usefulness that you want to bring and the capabilities that you have to bring them into this world with. So we talked about a couple of skills also in addition to this. So if we were to get really nitty gritty, this concept of defining words and challenging assumptions, the idea of relationship building and the skills to deepen, strengthen, and choose which relationships we want to have, as well as problem solving and observation, and a willingness to guide others without doing it for them is also a very big part of helping other people, meeting them where they're at, but also developing them along their path to be able to use their usefulness, to be able to have them experience the growth they want, and to be able to create a space where rejuvenation can happen for those people outside of ourselves as well. Everybody, you are listening to the Voice of Bold Business Radio. This is Program 8, Rejuvenate to Elevate with Les Dossie. All the program notes are going to be at thevoiceofboldbusiness.com/program 8, or just Google Rejuvenate to Elevate. Also there, you'll be able to find out where to subscribe so you can listen to us or watch us wherever you happen to be in whatever platform you prefer. And we want to know your story. Do you have a story? We'll use like our traffic stories, where there was something that was causing all of the energy to be focused somewhere and getting stuck, and recognizing that you were stuck, and then somehow catching yourself at it one day and consciously making a change. What was that before and after like? Let us know. And remember, rejuvenate to elevate not only your personal success, but your business success.
Subscribe at thevoiceofboldbusiness.com and get more information, program notes, and past episodes. Bold leaders approach each situation and focus on action to achieve a higher level of leadership. Jessica Duell, your business advocate, is the host of the Voice of Bold Business Radio. Thank you for joining us.